For me personally, I often define empowerment through a disability lens. Does what I'm doing allow me to be independent? Does what I'm doing allow me to do my daily tasks? Does what I'm doing allow me with enough energy in the tank, some might say spoons, to enjoy life with the small leisures and pleasures? If what I'm doing answers yes to any of these questions, it doesn't necessarily have to answer yes to all of them, then I may view the activity that I'm doing as empowering.
Today we have 6 sex workers here to talk about the topic of empowerment. On our left we have Amy Venus. Amy is a stripper and online sex worker living under the Nordic model in Sweden. Before entering sex work, Amy worked in performing arts, which she feels has many overlaps with her work now. Amy is also a member of the organisation Red Umbrella Sweden. Jenna Love is a Australian sex worker living under full decriminalisation who has worked under legalisation and partial legalisation as well. And she is the president of the Scarlet Alliance, an Australian sex workers' rights organisation, and is also currently studying a master's degree in social justice with a focus on human rights. Nugs Lackey is a full-service sex worker living in Canada who has been working under the Nordic model since it was introduced in Canada in 2014. They've also worked internationally under other legal models and are a strong advocate against the Nordic model. Jaleesa Elite is a professional dominatrix and online sex worker living and working in America under a criminalisation model. And Avalon H. Grail is a full-service sex worker and online sex worker in Australia who has worked both before and after decriminalisation. Avalon has worked in brothels and independently, touring up and down the Queensland coast. Avalon was awarded the 2025 Sex Worker Community Recognition Awards Disability Service Provider of the Year 2025 and has been a long-standing advocate for sex work to remain a necessary and reasonable claimable service under the NDIS. Okay, so our first question is, how do we define empowerment? What does empowerment mean to us? What do we think other people understand empowerment to be?
So I don't know, it's okay, I'll jump in here. I believe the general definition of it is something along the lines of, having autonomy and control over your own life and to make choices in your life. At least that's what I've gathered from the times when I've been trying to define it to radical feminists, at least.
I will agree. Yes, I definitely will agree with that as well. So I'm going to bring this up here. For me personally, I often define empowerment through a disability lens. Does what I'm doing allow me to be independent? Does what I'm doing allow me to do my daily tasks? Does what I'm doing allow me with enough energy in the tank, some might say spoons, to enjoy life with the small leisures and pleasures? If what I'm doing answers yes to any of these questions, it doesn't necessarily have to answer yes to all of them, then I may view the activity that I'm doing as empowering. And I view sex work as empowering because it does answer those questions for me. And so, yes, it is often described as if it allows you to do the things that you just want to do. Whether sex work is what you want to do or it allows you to do the things that what other people want to do, I find empowering.
I would say empowerment and empowering, it's not really in my vocabulary. It's not a word that I particularly connect with. My understanding is that at its root, I guess it means like the M part of the word meaning in, as though when we say something is embodied, it's in our bodies. So I view it as in your power, which is exactly how Nugs defined it, having power. But I think that then leads us into a conversation about what the hell is power, and that can be viewed on a macro scale, on a micro scale, on an individual, on a group, that is, that's a big topic, and I think it is such a nebulous term. And obviously it's a meaningful word for a lot of people. For me, it isn't, but I think it's really valuable that you've asked us to define it to start this conversation, because it is definitely something that seems to mean different things to different people, and can be really, people can be talking about that same word and talking about different things.
Well, that's one of the reasons I sort of brought it as the first question, because quite often when I have other people come into my comment sections who aren't sex workers, empowerment is very much the focus, but everyone seems to have a different understanding of what that is. And I think generally speaking, when sex workers speak about the idea of feeling empowered by their work, it is usually that they feel that their work has given them an increased level of control over their life, whether that be in the financial aspect or, the personal freedom, in looking after their disability, looking after their health, like all of these different things where it's like a material condition that has improved, right, in some way. And I think that's usually the focus for sex workers. When civilians talk about empowerment, I think it's very much more of a feeling, you know, like, do you feel empowered? Is that like a self-confidence? You know, what are we trying to sort of describe when we're saying that? Do you know what I mean? I think a lot of people have a lot of very different understandings.
I feel like it touches with the idea of empowerment touches too much with the idea of like when someone says like, how do you respect yourself when you do this? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how do I have self-respect? I feel it. So like either I'm empowered or I'm not. So like, I feel like it's like it's kind of like a useless term for me. Like empowerment's like a useless idea for me because it's like, why do I have to explain that it makes me feel this way? I'm me. Are you in me, living me? No. So it's like, so nebulous is like a good word for it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think as well, like, why do you have to justify it as being empowering in order for it to be acceptable to do, you know, legally or otherwise, socially? You know, why does something have to be empowering for other people not to judge you for doing it?
Yeah. One of the things that I think a lot of people get stuck on is that they can view empowerment as either feeling fulfilled or like reaching self-actualization, which is totally true for some people, but not everyone has goals that are fulfilled through laboring. Like, not everyone's goals are fulfilled through their job. And so why does mine have to be fulfilled through my job? Because you, like the person asking the question, probably also doesn't feel fulfilled or empowered through the labor that they do through capitalism. But they seem to be so stuck on the fact that my job has to be. And they don't see the two-way street in it, which is very interesting sometimes.
Mm.
It seems like also a lot of times when civilians especially, are having the discussion about whether or not sex work is empowering and this and that, they're really only seeing it from the lens of, you know, oh, well, many people don't have a choice. They have to get into it due to financial reasons, which obviously is something that is not unique or exclusive to sex work specifically. But I think they don't also recognize that we have, even though we are obviously with limited opportunities and, you know, options that we can and decisions we can make within our life in the systems that we live under, we still have the ability to make certain choices for ourselves on like a smaller scale. And those small choices can feel empowering to us and to a certain degree. And it's almost disempowering for other people to try and, I guess, tell you that those choices that you can and decisions you can make for yourself that can feel empowering individually to you, like getting into sex work and starting sex work, isn't, when oftentimes it can absolutely feel that way in an otherwise world that we're living in that's constantly disempowering us consistently. I don't know. I just feel like making the decision to get into sex work was an empowering one, even when it might not have been the word that it came to me when I was making those decisions. But whenever I look back into it, it helped me make better choices for my life and have better autonomy over, you know, myself, my life, my body, so on and so forth. And that's kind of almost the exact definition. And so being able to have made that small choice within obviously my limited options feels an empowering choice. But then it feels like people outside of our industry are constantly trying to take that away, in a sense, by making it seem like bigger picture. No, you couldn't possibly have been empowered making that choice. And I don't know. Sorry, I couldn't.
No, but I think it is almost that because they try and construct a narrative that because you have a limited set of options that you actually have no choice at all. You know, and I think that's quite disempowering. They're taking your agency away in the decision that you've made.
Like you were saying, it's very much a subjective thing for a lot of people too as well. It's going to be very much like a personal thing for people. And at the end of the day, it's not someone else's like choice to define that for you or make those decisions for you or tell you what is and is not empowering. It's just very, I don't know. I feel like that goes against the word itself when people are trying to take those actions.
I think we might get onto this more later, but, I think it's great that we're having this conversation, and thank you for bringing us together for it. But I also resent the fact that we have to, because I have to say, not one single person has ever asked my husband if he finds driving the forklift in the warehouse empowering. No one has ever asked him that. No one has ever asked me how I feel about him doing that job, which is an incredibly dangerous job, let's be clear. And if we look at our material conditions, which I guess is what you were saying, that often workers, we look at it in terms of material conditions, which I think in a capitalist society is how we have to, because that's reality. I'm sitting here, it's 9 a.m. here, it's a beautiful sunny day. I'm chatting to a bunch of brilliant whores, and I'm going to have an excellent morning. He's at work. It's wetting. It's hot here in Australia. He is lifting boxes. He's doing physical labour, and he's got to do that every single day without fail. Not every single day, sorry, Monday to Friday, 8 hours a day. He doesn't get to pick his hours. Coming back to that initial kind of definition that Nugs gave us about autonomy and about choice and what you're doing. And yes, there are limits to the choice, but I have so much freedom compared to him. I have so much autonomy. I have so much free time, and I'm able to spend so much of my time doing the things that I love, like advocacy, doing things that I'm not being paid to do, which, if we want to talk about empowerment, if I want to use that language, that's probably where I find it. The fact that I have to work, the fact that I have to do something to earn money, to have a roof over my head and to put food on the table, that doesn't feel empowering to me. It just is what it is. And you could argue it's disempowering. But the fact that I've found a way that I can do that aligns with my disability, that aligns with the way my brain works, the way my body works, and allows so much joy in my life outside of work. The work itself is whatever. Who gives a shit? But everything else I'm able to do in my life is because of the nature of the work that I've found that works for me, and it's not going to work for everyone. As we've all said, it's so individual. But for me, if we want to talk about empowerment, it does allow me to have the life that brings me joy.
Yeah, I think I'm very much also in the same. English is not my first language. The same. What's it called? The same traits that Jenna is into, category. Thank you. Yeah, that empowerment is being able to make your own. I don't know, choices out of the choices you have. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. Sorry, it's late here. I've been awake the entire day.
Your English is absolutely fine, Amy.
Yeah,
it's good.
Yeah, you speak very well. I think just to piggyback off of what Amy and Jenna were just saying then as well, is it really is very funny to see that other people don't ever question other jobs around their empowerment. Because I have had jobs previously where I have been sobbing my eyes out to my boss, just being like, I can't come back here tomorrow. If I come back here tomorrow, I will not come back the next day because I will not be on this earth anymore. And never once did they go, oh, is this job really disempowering to you? Or are you, why can't you find a different job that feels better? Because it was the only skill I had. And it's very funny when people assume that I must have gotten into this when there was no other option. Because I've had other jobs before where I had no other option. For a very short period for a decent period of time in my early 20s, the only job skill I had was working in a call center selling health insurance. And it was incredibly awful to speak to people every day about their health conditions and have to sell them an incredibly expensive product. Health insurance in Australia, as much as we have public health care, is exorbitant. And me at the end of the call having to ask this family of 4 for $700 a month in order to purchase the health care that they need felt awful, and it depleted me, and it was incredibly disempowering. because I felt as though I had no other choice and I had no other skills. I couldn't even get a bartending job at that time because I had no other experience on my CV to put to go to another role. And I stayed in health insurance for quite a long time, and at no point did anyone ever look at me and, in the face and question whether I felt empowered by that job or not, because I clearly didn't. I preferred, and very luckily in Australia as well, we have our public systems such as Centrelink, where I can choose to remove myself from the workforce and go on what some people call the dole or job seeker payments. And that was more empowering than labouring in the one skill that I had, because I felt so awful having to go through these conversations every day where I felt as though these people also had no choice and I had no other choice apart from offering them the product that put them in abject poverty. But not once was that ever questioned. And it's insane to me when you think back on those kinds of memories that you have in life.
I think that's such a great point that I hadn't really considered before, Avalon, which is the consumer of your product or the client or the other people that you're interacting with. Are they empowered by your work? And they don't have to be. I'm not arguing that we need to all be doing jobs that are empowering other people, but that has a flow-on effect, that impacts how you feel when you get home from your job. And that's not nothing.
Is it okay if I piggyback off Avalon's the part about because I noticed when you're talking about being at your other job and, the way that you were being treated or the way it was making you feel and this and that, a lot of us kind of had that look like, oh yeah, we've been through similar. And I think that's the thing is almost everybody who's worked any kind of working class, minimum wage, customer service facing type of work has had experience with how demoralizing, degrading some of those jobs can be, how the conditions can be terrible, treatment of employees is terrible, just awful all around. But nobody's going around to the people in those jobs demanding that they find it empowering or telling them that it's not or trying to save them from the fact that it's not. And it's just, I don't know, it seems very not cognitive dissonance, but there seems to be some kind of disconnect that people don't understand when so many people have a shared universal experience of how terrible all of these civilian jobs can be, and yet it's never treated in the same way. The energy is never the same as it is towards sex work.
It makes me think about there are entire communities online dedicated to people venting from their jobs. So on Reddit, for instance, you've got Tales from the Pizza Guy, Tales from Retail, and I love reading those stories like the rest of them because, as you've said, like most sex workers, I have worked other jobs, which is something they always seem to forget, that most of us are doing this because we've done other jobs and because for whatever reason that wasn't the right choice for us at that point in time. But all these other industries are very, it's encouraged to, and they should vent, because we all have to vent about work because work sucks. That's always my thing about when we say sex workers work. People are sick of hearing that, but it's kind of missing the next part of the sentence, which is sex workers work and all work sucks. That's just how it is. But when we want to vent about our work, that's when then we have to answer to empowerment, then we have to answer about exploitation, then we have to get into all these other things. So then we're not actually given this space to vent about work like everyone else seems to be. And that's quite disempowering.
Yeah, I think there's something definitely to be said about the way that sex work is held to a completely different standard than other types of labour. And I think, I can't remember it word for word obviously, but there's a section in Not Your Rescue Project, which I know a lot of people in here probably have read, where they sort of say the sort of, to paraphrase it, the amplification of sexual exploitation as an issue serves to sort of minimize exploitation in other labor industries. And I think that's almost something that's being touched on here, is all of these horrific working experiences that we've all had in other jobs are sort of treated as normal and expected, but in our job any level of mistreatment is the worst thing in the world, and I think that goes to show a very interesting double standard on who is allowed to be exploited.
I wanted to hold off on this until later, but the idea of speaking about empowerment always makes me think about, like, obviously I'm Black. I'm a Black woman living in America in the South, so that adds, like, intersectionality and nuances to, like, my experience. And I always think it's, like, crazy that, like, when you mention, like, having a negative experience and then people will immediately say, like, this can't be empowering. It's like, I feel like the people, I've never had another Black person ask me, is sex work empowering? I've never had any person that's visibly marginalized ask me, is it empowering? Because, like, it kind of doesn't even, like, don't even register, because it's like immediately your thoughts are, can I make a living from this? Is it a bearable job? Like, because in any situation where I can be seen, I'm gonna experience some kind of racism. So, like, I could just be getting it if I spoke differently, if I had a voice that, you know, gave away that I was Black. If I was on a call center, I could be getting attitudes from people. I could be getting microaggressions from people, or macroaggressions usually over the phone. If I was a server or something like that, like, I would be getting all this, like, especially in America, in the South, I would be getting, like, the worst shit. So it's like, my options were, like, do a job that probably I couldn't physically be able to do anyways because of disability. But, like, I just think it's crazy that, like, the idea of empowerment gets asked, because it's like, it feels very, like a very privileged question to have to ask in the first place. Because, like, and I can understand, like, if you're white or perceived as white, that I can understand why some white person's probably going to ask you this. Like, some white person going to ask you, is this job empowering? But I just, like, I sit there and think, like, I know it comes up to you guys more often. For me, it's like, I get the self-respect question. I don't get empowerment as much. But it's just, like, the idea that you think you have enough privilege, enough time to sit here and think, is this job empowering? Do you feel good when you do this job? And I'm sitting here like, I'm going to get shit everywhere, anywhere. But I chose this job. I choose the stipulations of how I work. I choose how people can interact with me. I choose my rates. I choose everything. So it's like, are you cool? Like, are you fucking cool asking this question? Because that's crazy. But, yeah, just wanted to say that.
I think you're
honestly, that's
so
really...
right, Jalissa. Sorry,
Yeah,
Max.
I was going to say... No, it's okay. I was just going to say that's a really interesting, like, perspective that I think we normally, like, at least for myself, I would not have considered, but I really appreciate, like, hearing that in general, because you're right when you pointed out the fact that, like, it's really only people who are not, like, it's white folks for the most part who are bringing that topic to the conversation, and I really appreciate that perspective in general.
And I think it's the... Oh, sorry. So just to say, Jalissa, as well, making my whole table go, I think also it's when the white people ask me that question, because you're right, it's never a minority person who is asking me that question on whether I feel empowered. It's almost as if they're accusing me of now minoritizing myself. They're like, why would you put yourself in a position where now you are othered, when you were inside the social bubble of not being othered, and now you have? And it's definitely framed that way now that you've pointed that out. It's them, from their perspective, they're like, why would you remove yourself from the safe bubble that we're all in as white people and put yourself over there? And it's like, well, you know, there's other things to it, but yes, when you point it out, it's them seeing those Venn diagrams and wondering why you've now shifted your part of the Venn diagram.
Because it's like, with the intersectionality, it's like my otherness is visible being Black, as it would be if I was brown or Asian. But, like, if you have, like, an invisible disability, then you're also othered anyways, but people don't see it as obviously. So, like, that's why my experience is a little bit more nuanced to it, because it's like, there's no there actually is hiding it. I've known people that hit it and they have white personas online. Crazy work. Couldn't do it myself. But, like, I can't hide it as easily. So, or if I don't ever talk about any of my disabilities, you'd never know. So, like, yeah, that was just my thoughts on it.
I think I'm certainly not the person here to speak on race as a ginger white person. There's no pretending otherwise for me. But I think the race thing is a big topic in sex work, and we know that the anti-sex work, the SWERF types, sort of love to play that card disingenuinely. I'm not sure what that word is.
Yeah,
without good faith. Yeah. And, I just wanted to speak on, Jaleesa, like, obviously you mentioned some people that will try to hide the colour of their skin, etc. And I know that here in so-called Australia, our First Nations people, sex workers who are Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander, I'm yet to come across one who has advertised openly about being a First Nations person. And again, it's not my place to speak on this, but what I hear is that they will generally pick a different ethnicity, cultural background that is seen as more, exotic or something like that. And that's an element of self-protection, but also of business, of marketing, of the fact that sex work is work and they need to earn a living. And I think that's a whole other conversation that, is really fucked. And I don't want to bring us into that, but I think it's really worth bringing this conversation about, as you said, Jaleesa, how privileged it is to expect empowerment. From a global perspective, how many fucking people are empowered by their jobs, how many people have choice, and what really is choice when it comes to working under capitalism.
But also wanted to, I think, bringing back to the empowerment conversation, I found it funny that when, Jaleesa, when you were saying at the very end, where, this is just a choice I make and it helps you make, be able to do other things in your life and this and that. It's everything that you were describing at the end of why you choose sex work and how it's, I guess, like, good for you in that sense that it's at the very least, like, paying bills and keeping a roof over our head and things like that. It's just things we got to do. That was almost the definition of empowerment too, as well. And so it's when we end up coming down to people consistently trying to tell us that it isn't, when you hear sex workers really get down into why they make these choices or why they got into it or why it's, I guess, one that they're continuing to do, it's almost the exact definition of empowerment at the end of the day. And if people who actually understood what empowerment means, would that make that argument that sex work isn't empowering, if they actually understood what empowerment means, they'd be able to, when they hear sex workers talk about, making the choice to do sex work and this and that, it actually is empowerment. Like, at the end of the day, when we define the word, that's actually what it is. And I don't know, I guess I find it funny so much that they make the argument that it isn't, but when you actually hear the stories of people making those choices, it literally is. And yeah, sorry.
No, it's like, it's like how I was saying about the thing about self-respect. It's like people try to tell you, you can't have self-respect. How can you tell me what I have? I respect myself, so therefore it's self-respect. And if I'm telling you that the job allows me to live the life I want to lead, how is it not empowered? Like, the problem is people don't know what words mean, and they don't want to look it up. They just it's like that thing where people go around the internet. It's like the accountability argument, and okay, but did you look up what accountability means? Did you look up what empowerment means? Did you look up what self-respect is? They just want to say the word and get a gotcha, but I don't know, man. Dictionary.com. I don't.
And I think this comes back to where we sort of started about this idea that there's almost two different definitions of empowerment in use, and we've got a very sort of base level. Does it give you power to do something in your life? Does it give you power to have some level of increased control over your circumstances? but other people have got this sort of like lace and frills definition that is like, does it make you feel really good about yourself? And, you know, do you wake up feeling whole in the morning? And, you know, like, are you walking on cloud 9 24/7? It's like this sort of like heightened level of existence, which is like just not achievable for most people. I think it's not realistic.
Does your job make you feel like a powerful goddess?
But I think that's the thing, is when you sort of say it in that way, it makes it obvious how ridiculous that notion is, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Of like, does it make you feel powerful? It's like, no, it makes me survive capitalism.
This core memory just popped into my head of me as a teenager watching an episode of Dr. Phil, who, of course, you know, not the best scholarly reference, but who was talking to some woman who, you know, was engaging in prostitution, and he was trying to explain to her how empowering it might be. Something, I'm absolutely paraphrasing here, but something around how, you know, does she know that there are men out there, and obviously this is a very hetero and cisgender perspective, but he was going, do you understand that there are men out there who will be with you for free, basically? And I was like, oh honey, we know.
Why would
we are
that?
aware. Like, anybody that's AFAB, that was raised as a girl or a woman, is aware. We know they'll do it for free, and that's why we're putting a price tag on it. Like, it was just such a strange that he thought she didn't understand that concept, and that it would be empowering to do the exact same thing she's doing, but in her circumstances not get anything in return. Just a really strange way of thinking about everything.
God, I hate fucking Dr. Phil.
I hope it's okay to speak about like a personal thing that occurred. So if anybody follows me on TikTok, you probably like know that I was working at PetSmart fairly recently for a couple months, and I ended up walking off the job, and it was the first time I've ever done that in my life, where I've ever just like been like, I'm out of here. I'm not dealing with the way you guys are treating me, pretty much. And I think about the fact that like, if I didn't have sex work to fall back onto, I probably would have had to stay in a job where I was being talked to like I'm dumb and unintelligent, being snapped at, constantly demoralized, and and to the point where I was having like panic attacks and feeling awful every time I go into work and stuff. If I didn't have sex work to fall back onto to still be able to, you know, be able to live and afford life and such, and make the decisions I did, like to just pack up my life from the city I was living in and move to a new city. And I still have to stay in a job that was probably just like slowly killing me inside. And to me, at least, that's when we get down to the like discussion of empowerment. Being able to have made those choices in my life, like I'm not going to take this kind of treatment, and be able to walk away from it, and having that security is thanks to sex work, is due to sex work, and I wouldn't have that without sex work to a certain degree. And it's just like, I don't know, I feel like just in like even personal experiences that I've had lately, it's very clear that, I don't know, it's to me, sex work has just almost been at the, like, as much as people want to make that argument that it's not empowering and this and that, it feels to me as if it's almost at like it's got empowerment almost in the base level of it to a certain degree, because it is giving you that flexibility and autonomy over your life and your choices to a certain degree, and being able to at least still survive and like make a living when otherwise you might have to be in even, I don't know, worse situations. But it depends. I guess it's personal and subjective at the end of the day. But I'm just thankful to have had the choice to be able to walk away from experiences like that due to sex work and thanks to sex work. Yeah. Also, fuck PetSmart. Sorry.
Fuck PetSmart.
Yeah, fuck PetSmart.
Just to circle back on the like being able to live the life we want, to be able to like live the life we want from the choices we have, to me that is empowerment. If I compare it to when I was doing like performing arts, like I don't know, it just like literally like breaking my body, working so much, so hard for like so little money in the end. Like that didn't, it was fun, yes, it was fun, but it didn't really feel like empowering. Does that make sense? Like I feel more empowered like on the pole because like for me, any work isn't like, in the end, any work for me isn't empowering. I don't like to work. I don't like any type of work. Actually, I'm very lazy. But having money and freedom, to me, that is empowering because I can do what I want on my like spare time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And also, if I compare when I was doing performing arts, when I was like, for example, teaching, part of that work is a little bit like customer service. You know, you meet your students, you have to make them happy, whatever. If someone is being rude, I have to handle them. You know, if I work online or in the club, if someone is being rude and I don't want to tolerate it, I'm just like, I'm not gonna respond. Like, I don't know, being able to make that choice to be like, I can just walk away. Like, I have free will, I can walk away. To me, that is empowerment, to be able to make that choice.
Yeah, that was something that came up on the last episode actually as well. The idea that in sex work is essentially a form of customer service work, and in other customer service jobs, you have to put up with these clients regardless, because your boss is going to force you to interact with them because it's about making money for the business. Whereas in sex work, especially in things like online sex work, you can literally just block, gone, you know, don't have to deal with it anymore. And when it comes to, you know, full service work in strip clubs, you can block their number, you can get them barred from the club, you can stop seeing them as a client, and you can just say, no, bye, you're cut off from me, like no more access. And I think there is a massive level of power in that, in having the choice just to not engage with people that you don't want to. And I think that's something that's not afforded to a lot of people in a lot of other customer facing jobs, you know?
Yeah, like how many Reddit stories are there of barista, some guy hitting on her, and she's just, you know, doing her job, and then the guy starts stalking her, starts showing up like, the fact that there's like probably 10 a day posted of some girl, and she's just making your coffee and said, oh, how's your day? How's your morning? And got a whole stalker from it. Whereas if I don't like how you spelled my name, I'm blocking it. I don't know, man. That's like a big difference right there.
I had an experience where I too am from the theatre kid, performing arts to sex worker pipeline, and for many years I worked a range of jobs while still doing sex work, because I always had it in my head I needed a backup, and this wasn't a long term. I had all these things that people tell you, and then eventually I made the decision that no, actually this is really important to me, and it's more than just a job to me. It's a big part of my activism and all of that, and so I decided that I was going to throw everything into it, get rid of the other jobs. And then about a year after doing that, an old boss called me up, really desperate for me to take a gig where I was like emceeing at an event. And he offered a lot of money because he was really desperate. And I was like, yeah, sure, cool, I'll do it. I'll just do this one-off, you know. And I had been out of that environment for so long that I had completely forgotten what it was like. And I've got to say, the disempowerment that I felt, the way that suddenly people were hitting on me, people were, coming up to me, and just, that little bit of extra touch that just feels slightly too long or just slightly too low or whatever, and all of that. And I felt objectified all night, and I couldn't leave because this is the reality in a lot of jobs. I'd signed up to do the thing, and I had to stay there and take that all night. And I just left feeling disgusting and frankly like a whore. Like, that's kind of I love the word whore. It's one of my favorite words. But in that way that people use that language pejoratively, that's how I felt. I felt really used and taken advantage. It was gross. And I went, I want to go back to the job where I'm being objectified because that's what I've signed up for. And that's what I've asked people to do. And I'm charging them appropriately for it. And it's within these constraints, and there's boundaries, and it's all very clear. So that was a really big moment for me in realizing that.
That kind of brings me, that like brought a memory to me. I remember one time I had like a dance gig, like a normal dance gig in a normal nightclub, like as entertainment, me and my colleague. I remember this because like all nightclubs have usually security, you know, and we were dancing like elevated from the floor kind of. And I remember my colleague, she one customer to the club, I don't know, like started to touch her, you know, like while she was working, and security wasn't there for her, you know, so she had to like handle that herself. And then we had to like tell our manager like, oh, someone like touched her inappropriately and security wasn't there to help her. It's like that felt weird also because I'm so used to like when I'm working in the strip club, I'm like, if someone starts doing some like shit, I can just be like, security, can you like kick them out? Like security don't ask any questions. They're like, who, which one? And then they just like throw them out. Like to me, it feels somewhat empowering to know that you have someone that like, you know, backs you up without any questions or anything, instead of being like, can someone please do something, and be like no one's gonna help you sometimes. That feels disempowering, knowing that no one's gonna help you, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I hope it's okay. I wanted to mention that a lot of times the argument towards it being sex work not being empowering, they bring up survival sex workers a lot. And I've been in this industry going on 14 years now, and I've been at the level where I can pick and choose the clientele that I meet and, you know, reject clients that I don't like the way that they're talking to me, whatever else. And I've also been at the level where I literally have to take whoever messages me. I don't have a choice. Like, I need to get literally whoever will give me money that day kind of thing. And even in those moments where I didn't have a choice on who I was seeing, even if they were giving me red flags, I just have to put extra safety precautions and still see them because I need that money at the end of the day. I still felt better about that choice, and like I had more power over that choice than the times when I've been forced to go into, you know, customer service facing jobs or minimum wage facing jobs where you know that it's going to be harmful to you too as well, even if it's more of like a slow burn, when you're going to be treated like shit and you're going to feel awful and it's going to be, you know, hurting you at the end of the day. Even maybe the way that customers treat you or the management treats you or whatever else, it still always felt better being able to make the choice to see the clients with sex work, even in my like lowest survival moments, than many other types of jobs, civilian jobs that I've had to do. Yeah, I just, even at that, like, whenever it comes to that, they bring up survival sex workers, even in those specific moments, it's always felt like a more autonomous choice and a better choice overall. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to throw that out there before I lost that train of thought.
I just wanted to bring up, I know Nugs lives under the Nordic model, and I think that all of this stuff, it becomes even more important when we are discussing those who engage in survival sex work, survival sex, they might call it, and people who are on the borderline of you know, how much choice they really have in the matter, which I think a lot of people don't realize as well. A lot of us, despite the privilege we may now present with, have been in that situation at one point or another. But I think this stuff becomes even more important because when people are saying things like, what's great about this job is that I can get security to take someone out, or I can turn around and say, I'm not seeing that client and the owners here need to make sure that that client doesn't return here or whatever. None of that can happen when we don't have rights, when we don't have legislative support for that. And the same as when you are in that situation where you really can't afford to be picky with your clients, you are still making that choice, but you need to have the information to be able to make the choice, whatever it is. And laws like the Nordic model, legislation like Foster Sester, takes away all of that power, aka disempowers us, because it makes it so much harder for us to get information out of potential clients or fans or whatever they are. And then this whole thing that we're saying, thank God I've got sex work that I can go back to, is also in question, because I think those of us who have been doing this work for, say, over a decade will know that the landscape is very, very different. And that is primarily because of some really bullshit legislation that has been passed. Because 10 years ago, it used to be that you absolutely could just go, do you know what? I'm quitting. Tomorrow I'm going to put up an ad and I'll make some money. It may not be heaps, it may not be a good experience, blah, 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 but I can do that. And now, at least where I live, that's not an option. It actually isn't this, the access to not thriving in the industry, but just making some money out of the industry. It isn't what it used to be. And a lot of that is because of shitty laws. So I just wanted to touch on all these things we're talking about speak to rights and protections.
Well, I was going to say, we had obviously Danny on the last episode who has lived in both Australia and Sweden. And so they were talking about how different they found it working under those two models, and like how the pricing changes, the safety strategies change, like the way that you work changes, everything. They were talking about how they sort of had like no preparation going into that. They didn't even really know what the Nordic model was before they moved there. And all of a sudden they have to make all of these big decisions about like changing the way they work and all of these things. And like that was experienced as quite like disempowering for them. And like, I think the way that you can see it so starkly when the same person who, demographically is appealing to the same clients, who has, already a set persona in the industry, is taking with them a certain amount of like online clout, whatever, and then is moving to a different country and is experiencing like such vastly different conditions the moment they touch down on the land. Like, it just goes to show how much the legislation does have an impact on how empowered sex workers are.
Yeah, I work under the Nordic model now and have for most of my time in this industry. But I went to work in the United States once, where it's full criminalization, and I was shocked at how easy it was to screen clients under full criminalization compared to the Nordic model. I remember when I was planning the trip with my friend, and we were talking to each other about screening, and she's like, yeah, they'll send you references, they'll send you their ID, they'll send you this and that. The clients here in Canada won't even give me a fake name. I asked for a name like John Smith, and they're like, no, you can bring that might come back to me somehow. Like, you might be able to find out who I am in some way with some like fake name. They can't even give me that. But it's like, I remember when I went to the US, the clients were just so like comfortable with screening, because they were used to it, and to them it was like an assurity that you weren't a cop to a certain degree, because it seems like both parties have that like equal, or at least to them it feels like they have equal level of like criminality, and so clients are like, yeah, let's both parties make sure that we're not cops kind of thing. Versus in Canada, it's like they are terrified. If there's even a cop down the road, they're convinced it's a sting. It's like your options between clients under the Nordic model is choosing between anonymous client number 1 and anonymous client number 2. It's whoever talks to you nicest. That's literally it. Like, you just have to go off vibes alone. Versus like having someone's entire information, their employment, references, so on and so forth. It's just like very different, and does give you different choices and like the ability to make different choices. And like decide what clientele you're meeting very differently. It's just, I'd work anywhere, but under what we got here in fucking Canada, excuse my language, because it's just so terrible.
Well, it comes back to power, right? There's a power imbalance in that model, which is ironically what all of the people who talk about empowerment are pushing for.
And I think just to really hone in the differences between certain legal frameworks, I've actually had the privilege of experiencing certain legal frameworks in Australia while being an open and out sex worker. And this, like, even in my own state, my experience will not be the same as others. But I have been shown through experience, at least in my location, that the police force, child safety and family law are capable of understanding my work and respecting it as a job. I've had police officers, child safety officers and judges all defend my right in Queensland, Australia to pursue this line of work, and have knocked back assumptions by respondents that my job has negative impacts on myself or my family. And I understand that very specific example is probably niche, because even down the road there's probably going to be a different police officer who would absolutely not be understanding, but it really helps when it's not criminalised. And working under decrim, and then having people who I'm very lucky to have come across that were just like, oh yeah, I don't care, you go to work and come home, he's not going to get shit for saying that against you, has been very empowering. Like, for me to be able to look back at that respondent and be like, you actually have no power to use that against me because of the framework that we live in Queensland, Australia, has been incredible. And it's really disappointing that, yes, people want to take that away from us. I mean, we've only been decriminalised in Queensland for a short period of time, and people are already talking about removing it. And it's like, oh no, you really don't understand what you are removing, because, again, they don't understand what the consequences of those things are.
I mean, it's really huge for Queensland, where just a few years ago it was enshrined in law that it was legal for the cops to entrap sex workers. It was legal for them to come in, people take their clothes off, all of that to go, that was fully legal. And Queensland cops are well, no cops are my favourite, right? But Queensland cops are up there. So, that is really, really huge. And we have that experience. You were speaking about the Danny's experience going from Sweden to Australia, because we have 7 states and territories here that all have their own legislation. Those of us who tour around the country have worked in criminalisation, in legalisation, in decrim, blah, blah, blah. So even just us, we can go a few streets down the road, and I know it's similar in places in the US and other places, I'm sure. And all of a sudden your work is criminalised. And that is quite, as you said, it's the same person, I'm the same person, I've got the same brand, I've blah, 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 presumably appeal to the same people, and yet my experience is so different if I'm in a place like South Australia, which effectively has a criminalisation model. My experience is really, really not nice there.
I was actually just discussing with my tour partner whether or not we were going to go to South Australia, and we were looking at the laws, because we wanted to try it. We wanted to try Adelaide. And it was insane to discover that all the hard work we had done recently, specifically matching our branding together, curating a joint experience, finding a market that we can work in together, because that's our safety model, is always being together, actually increased our likelihood of breaking South Australian law. Like, everything we had done to curate this experience and come together, like the fact that we have the same photographer so that our photos look the same, the fact that you can kind of like link us together through our ads and through our online content, would have been what put us in danger in South Australia. And we had to say, like, just last night, quite literally, we're on tour in Cairns at the moment, and just last night we had to say, actually, we're not doing that, because we felt too unsafe, and we hadn't even visited yet. And it was extremely disappointing, and it was a reminder that I live this job in a very privileged way. Like, I almost have almost no discrimination in my personal life, because I'm so out and open, and I have such a large bubble around me that makes me feel safe. And last night, after that discussion, it was just a reminder that is a bubble that can burst. So yeah,
I think there's like a dichotomy between you being in that position to be privileged enough to be able to tour, and if something doesn't seem like it's right, like it's just not going to seem safe to you, you can just opt out. But also, when Nugs is talking about doing survival work and having to deal with people that you probably wouldn't if you had more options or more lucrative options at that moment, like, I feel like that really exemplifies like the empowerment. Like, you, no matter what, you still get to have boundaries either way. You get to, at the top there's boundaries, at the bottom there's boundaries, and I was just like, I noticed that, especially like if you looked at my screen, you guys like right above each other. Like, so it was very fitting.
Speaking like as someone who lives in Sweden, if we just like travel back a little bit to Sweden, I remember when they enforced the new like OnlyFans ban law. You know, I remember I felt very disempowered because I just also noticed like my income like dropping because I did a lot of like customs before, and then I decided to not do customs because I don't know, I don't want to be at risk of being like, you know, evicted or anything, you know, like it can be a bit of a slippery slope, even though no one has been what's it called, convicted of like buying sex online. Like no, since the law, no one has been like convicted of that like crime, even though we have the law. I don't know, it's a bit backward, but I remember I felt very disempowered because you're taking away my income in the name of protecting me. Like it feels very backwards, you know. And also with OnlyFans, like the communication is one way for me now with my fans. And I remember, I know a lot of fans really like OnlyFans because, oh, I'm chatting, you know, with a very real person. Like, it feels like I'm chatting with a real person. And now it feels so, it's like hard because sometimes I usually also ask them, like, oh, what do you want? Like, what do you want to see? You know, being able to know what they want. Now, I just kind of have to guess. Like, that doesn't feel empowering. But like the law just doesn't make sense to me. Like if the law does not, the law makes me feel more disempowered than empowered, even though it's supposed to protect us. Somehow, I don't know, it doesn't make sense.
It took away your option to make choices. Like, so if I can't ask you, hey, can you make such and such custom, like, you don't get to decide whether or not you would like to do that thing. Like, if I can't even ask it, like, I literally cut it off at the knees. Like, you had options taken away from you. And then they're on top of the fact that, like, you're not able to make a choice. You're also, like, having your income affected by not even being able to make a choice.
And then I suppose that's the thing you have to consider with the income part especially, is that when you lose income from online work, you become more dependent on other forms of work. And if you enjoy working at the strip club, that's maybe not necessarily a problem. But for people that don't enjoy it and would prefer to be working online, you're pushing them into this situation they don't particularly want to be in and calling it protection. It's all just very, you know, controlling.
Yeah,
I've sorry.
In the U.S., they, I think it's North Carolina and like one other state, but you're not allowed to make content with a partner. And I'm just like, so this bitch can't fuck her husband on camera anymore? Like, that's crazy. That's crazy to me. Like, and I have to say it in terms like that. It's like, it's literally like, you're not letting, in a lot of these cases, they are partner or married couples. You are not letting them on camera.
It's also this crazy gendered thing where, like in my case, my husband features in a lot of my content because obviously we live together, very handy, somebody that can do that, and who's willing to hand over their ID to these scummy sites and all. Like, it's, you know, it's hard to find somebody that you want to film with and who wants to film with you. But if anything, I mean, I get the money from that, and we live, you know, we have shared finances, so whatever. But like, if anything, if anyone's using anyone in that situation, you know, the assumption, of course, is that if there's somebody with a penis, then they are pimping or trafficking or whatever.
Yeah,
the fuck.
they must be the predator in the situation. They must be the exploiter. Yeah.
I'm actually going to share an anecdote. Oh, sorry, Nugs. Mine will be very quick. I apologize. I'll share a very quick anecdote where when she first tried brothel work for the first time, her partner went with her because she was nervous, and she did the tour with her partner, and everyone said, oh, yes, he can come in and have a look to help. And then he was reported for pimping, and he had to be investigated by the police for simply providing her with the comfort of his presence, and being supportive in her decision. He was investigated for pimping. So yes, no, as soon as there is a penis involved, he must be the one in power. Oh, how strange. Yes.
Yeah.
Protection, not on my watch.
Sorry, my point isn't about this. It was about something we were talking about earlier with the legislation kind of like removing options. Sorry, I feel like I'm bringing us backwards now.
No, go for it.
It was more so about, because I live under the Nordic model here, and fairly recently the courts were kind of bringing certain things to, like, the Supreme Court, like whether we can have drivers and if they're considered pimps and this and that. And at one point they brought in specifically, landlords, and can they legally discriminate against sex workers under this law because of the fact that they could be charged as a third party, and for, profiting from prostitution. And the Supreme Court said, yes, absolutely, they can discriminate against sex workers. And so, as someone who doesn't have a good second job to cover, what I'm doing, I'm only doing sex work, and I have to hide that every time I'm trying to find housing. You don't have good options. You're very limited in your housing and what you're able to find. You certainly can't be found out, because then they can evict you, and you have to lie about your job and all this other stuff. And in general, the law, but also just the fact that landlords legally can discriminate against us because of this legislation, and because of the stigma that's still associated with our job too as well. It's completely limited our housing ability and housing options. And even when you get into housing, you are still completely at risk with zero protections because of the law that's supposedly supposed to protect us. And I just, as someone who's always had precarious housing, it really limits your options. You kind of just have to take whatever landlord will say yes to you, even if it's a terrible situation or a potentially abusive, exploitative situation. You kind of just got to take what you can get, because, you don't really have a lot of other options at that point in time. And that's certainly not empowering to a certain degree. That's kind of just ripping away options and choices and autonomy from people under the guise of protection.
Yeah. And I think on that,
I feel like if you follow the logic is get rid of landlords, but they won't go there.
Yeah. I was going to say on that note as well about all the increased risk of losing your housing, there's also a financial outlay to that as well, which is incredibly disempowering, if you want to use that terminology, of constantly having to move house, or the cost of being evicted and then having to find emergency housing. All of these things add up really, really quickly. Housing is one of the most expensive things we all have to deal with, and the cost of being repeatedly evicted, multiple times a year, having to constantly relocate, the moving costs, the deposits, all of that sort of stuff, it adds up really quickly, and it puts you in a more financially vulnerable situation where you're having to work more to make an amount of income that you wouldn't need if you had stable, affordable housing. All right, we're about at the halfway mark, so if anyone wants to do a quick drink, toilet, whatever break now, just be back in 5-10 minutes and we'll resume.
So I'm going to be honest, I think I have to take some work. Speaking of not having many options. So I don't think I'm going to be able to come back after the break, because I really do need money, unfortunately. So I just want to thank you guys for your time and letting me be a part of this, and everybody's perspective and stuff. But I'm going to have to take off after this. But I hope you guys have a good rest of the night. I love you all.
And thank you so much, Nugs.
Speak to you soon.
Bye. Thank you.
So to come back with a question, because obviously we're a Nugs down now, so we'll sort of start fresh a little bit. Who do we think is benefiting from the empowerment conversation existing? Because we don't seem to feel like it's us as sex workers who are benefiting from empowerment being such a common talking point. So why is it brought up so much, and who is it that is pushing that conversation? Who is it that's benefiting from that conversation?
I would say that anyone who wants to cause some type of division among sex workers, or to distract from more important issues, anyone whose goal is to keep us from having decriminalization as a whole, for us to have again, because I'm in the U.S., so no banking discrimination, no housing discrimination. Anyone whose goal is to keep us from having that, being at the bottom of the ladder, the last rung, that's who it is. So it's like, it's partially government, it's partially puritanical figures. So again, in the U.S., so we've got the churches. It's mostly them that want to make it so, one, this job doesn't seem desirable. So, which I think is stupid. Is like, if you wanted to, I want to start go on a tangent for myself, but to make the job look less desirable, so people young, again, this is also very cis focused, but they don't want young women to get into this. They don't want young women to have the autonomy that comes with this job, the boundaries you learn with having this job. So it's, from that point of view, it's the puritanical figures, the churches, and then the government, because, again, in America, they just don't want us to have shit, so, as a whole.
Yeah, I think the church, for obvious reasons, has its strong feelings about sex work and people who do sex work, and that's, doesn't need too much explaining. I think when it comes to the governments as well, not only do they obviously have a level of incentive to sort of keep sex work criminalised and not give us workers' rights, but also the way in which sex work is othered from other forms of labour, and the exploitation in sex work is discussed differently to other forms of labour, I think also does an advantage to governments in being able to downplay labour exploitation in other industries and be like, no, £2 minimum wage for waitressing, that's totally normal, there's nothing wrong with that, but giving someone a blowjob for £400, outrageous. Do you know what I mean? And there's this massive double standard of what's acceptable exploitation in the workplace.
Yeah, to go off what you're saying there, it's especially in a decriminalised area like my own, it's the people who wish to profit off of us that always want to frame it in a neat package. It's hard to sell to someone if there's no sense of urgency to either become empowered or to avoid exploitation. And again, in other industries, we're never really discussing the fact that they're still being exploited. But in our industry, you can sell not being exploited. Third-party companies can sell to you, hey, avoid this exploitation and become empowered this way. I mean, we all see it with the management companies, right, that are constantly in my DMs. I have to tell them to go all the time because I do not want you. But it's something to sell to us. It's something to profit off of us as well, if they can frame it in a way that you have to avoid or gain something also.
Yeah, I see sites do this as well, and I think it's something I've never even thought of in that way until you just said it, but a lot of sites recently have started using this idea of you pay no fees, the fees are all on the customer, so you're avoiding the being exploited of having a part of your profit taken, but realistically, whether the fee is coming from your side or the customer's side, you're marketing that into, you're doing the maths and adding that into what you're going to end up charging, because either way, it's coming out of your pocket a little bit, do you know what I mean? So it doesn't really matter which way it's framed. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's sort of a clever way in which they're trying to go, no, you're not paying fees if you come over here, we're not exploiting you, but the fee is coming from somewhere, you just aren't seeing it coming out of your account.
Yeah, I think it's really dangerous that there is that there are people and companies setting up this idea that they can offer a way of working in any industry that is free from any hint of exploitation and that will be empowering. I think that's actually really problematic to set that up and to sell that concept. Because people are going to believe that and they are going to then go into a situation less equipped with their guard down a bit more. And I think that's a real concern.
I guess I'll say the point that I had, and then I actually wanted to ask Amy a question. It's similar to the rad femmes too, because rad femmes are selling their advocacy. They're promoting that their ideas are correct, and maybe they're not making a monetary profit off of it, but they're gaining views, they're gaining traction, and they're gaining a social standpoint, a social hierarchy that is maybe slightly above what they started with. And promoting the advocacy does require them to have a selling point, because no one's listening to you unless you have a selling point, and they're selling the ideas that the sex worker are the reason that everyone's lives are the way that they are, rather than diving deeper into what are the frameworks that society is built on that has created the dichotomy that we live in. And I guess, Amy, for you living under the Nordic model, who do you think is benefiting off of you living under that system at the moment?
Well, it's not me benefiting from it. It's not me. I think, Jesus Christ, who is benefiting from it? I don't know, the government, of course, is probably the tax department, because you still have to pay tax on it, even though it's one way criminalized. No, what's it called? Help me. It's criminalized for the clients. Jesus Christ! Oh my God! You still have to pay taxes on it. So I think that whoever's benefiting on it is the tax department, because they get their money still. I think they're benefiting a lot from it, even though a lot of workers choose not to pay taxes, because why the fuck would we pay taxes when you're not giving us anything back? Let's be honest. I don't know, but it's also the way that authorities and government always frame sex work and exploitation. Like, they use sex work, trafficking, and exploitation interchangeably. So when you read text, it's very hard to distinguish. Like, do you mean a person who is a victim of trafficking, or do you mean an actual worker? The way they frame it, when I read text, I'm like, are we talking about a worker, or are we talking about a trafficking victim? How am I supposed to process this? Because I don't know if we're talking about someone trafficked or a worker. And I think they're benefiting a lot. I think they're benefiting a lot from making it a blurred line, because that makes other people outside of the industry not being able to distinguish between a worker and someone being trafficked. Does that make sense? For them, in a normal person's eyes, a trafficking victim or exploited person and a worker is like the same thing almost. And it's like, that doesn't benefit me, because I get pushed into victimhood. Like, how does that help me? It doesn't help me.
I think that perfectly explains everything that we've recently seen with the P. Diddy cases and the Epstein files, is that people are like, oh, but those are sex workers. And it's like, no, just because you gave her $100 after 12 hours of torture doesn't make her a sex worker. That's not how that works. And people can't differentiate that in our industry, even though they can clearly see it in others. Like, if you trap someone in a sweatshop and force them to make clothes, they are not a tailor, they are not a clothes designer, they are a trafficking victim, they're a slave. But no, you for some reason they can't then distinguish it in our industry. They're like, oh, but they threw some money at her afterwards, so no, she's not a victim, she was doing a job. And then they pick and choose when they want it to be a job. It's benefiting the perpetrators who want to get away with causing harm.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a lot of recent examples of ways in which the conflation of sex work and sex trafficking has been used to harm victims. And I think that's really dangerous. I also think there's something to be said probably for the way in which the exploitation argument and the sort of conflation of sex work and sex trafficking can be used to sort of bolster the rescue industry and the police funding for rescuing victims of trafficking, which actually usually just means arresting migrant women and deporting them and that sort of thing. And I think there's a lot of ways in which, by constructing a public narrative of we're saving these people, we're helping them, you're able to put a lot of money into increasing enforcement of policing and immigration control and all of those things into those areas, and have it look benign and useful and not sinister, which usually it is.
Speaking to that, when Amy mentioned the taxes, that just reminded me of searching for a word. I'm searching for a word to describe this man. I'm just gonna say, this man who wants to run for governor in my state, I'm in Florida, is proposing a tax on adult content for 50%. Because the way our taxes works, we have to pay, like, the income taxes here, we have to pay state and federal.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, that's a whole nother thing to add in, that they're trying to tax the actual fuck out of us. It's actually kind of funny. But, yeah, like, that just added a whole nother layer to it, like, that I don't think about the taxes for the government, because I feel like, you know, it's like that thing people say, like, only two things are guaranteed in life, paying taxes and death. And it's like, I don't really think about that. But now that, when Amy mentioned it, I was literally thinking, like, yeah, they really are. There's someone who's, like, trying to run, like, this is what he's not even running for governor yet, and he's talking about it, like, he's releasing ads for it. And if one person talks about it, unfortunately, there's 50 other states, or 49 other states, that are going to talk about it too eventually. So that's a whole nother issue of things that, like, they're benefiting off of it, which is, like, extra crazy, because I feel like you can't have it both ways. You can't have it be, like, making it harder and harder to make the, like, if you do online work specifically, making it harder to make porn, but also taxing the fuck out of us. Like, who's gonna keep making it if we're getting taxed 50%?
Yeah, I suppose that's the point, isn't it? To try and stop people from doing it. And I think as well, when it comes to the tax point, I think there's something interesting to sort of be explored in the way that other people profiting from your sex work or taking a percentage from your sex work is considered pimping or trafficking and illegal. But the government doing it, that's good, that's fine. You know, even if they don't consider your work to be work, and they actually consider it, like in Amy's case in Sweden, they consider it violence against women and not work at all, they still want your money from it, they still want a cut of your labor. And it's like, okay, so everyone else who takes a percentage of my income is a pimp, but you're not, even though you're the one that's taking most of my money and putting me most in danger. Like, how are you not the pimp in this situation? Do you know what I mean? I think there's a real, like, disconnect there between, like, the laws that they like to set for others and the way that they like to act themselves. But that's not uncommon for the government, really, is it? So, you know.
I just want to add on the tax thing, because I was supposed to do a video, so I took a bunch of pictures. Anyways, it doesn't like, but the, like, tax thingy is, there's no real, like, law for or against it, but in Sweden, whether or not you are a minor or not, if you work a normal job, obviously you have to pay taxes on it if you have a normal, regular job. But even if you are a minor in child exploitation, there is no real law whether or not you have to pay taxes on that. And that to me is crazy. It's like,
that is crazy.
And it's like, why would a child have to pay? I mean, there's no real law saying you have to pay taxes, but there's also no real law saying you don't have to pay taxes. So it's like a gray area. But, like, why the fuck would a child pay taxes on child exploitation? Like, are you crazy? Like, hello?
Yeah, so much for protecting vulnerable people now.
I just wanted to add in some thoughts around, I feel like I'm dragging us back slightly, but this question of, like, who benefits, right? And Avalon was asking about who Amy thinks benefits from the Nordic model. And I think we have a really great example of who benefits from any kind of criminalisation, which is what I consider the Nordic model to be, which is coming from in New South Wales, which is the state in Australia that I am based in. In 1995, we had a royal commission into allegations of police corruption, etc. And it ran for a couple of years. And one of the findings of that commission, so like a big inquiry, basically, one of the findings was that the only people who were benefiting from the criminalisation of sex work, because at that time it was criminal, was the police and the judiciary. And as a result, in 1995, before the commission had even completed, New South Wales began the process of decriminalising sex work. It's not perfect because we were the first place in the world, so it was very much a guinea pig situation. So it's far from perfect, and we're still working to try and fix that. But in my mind, that says it all. That's that at that moment. I'm going to say I don't understand. Of course, I do understand, but I want to say I don't understand why it wasn't decriminalised everywhere. Because that, in black and white, written by the powers that be, said this is what criminalisation does of the sex industry, and of, you know, that it was also a lot in drugs, blah blah blah, is that it benefits the police and the judiciary, and that's not what it's supposed to do. So that's the, like, to me, that's the ultimate kind of done mic drop moment, you know.
Yeah.
But then to this question of who benefits from these discussions around empowerment and talking about whether we're empowered or not, I think that what, ironically, this conversation does is disempower us, right? What it does is these people that insist on jumping on comment sections and telling the whole world that they think that sex workers aren't empowered, is they are perpetuating stigma. They are telling everyone that we don't have power, that we don't have personal power, that we don't have social power, that we don't have people around us who care about us. And so what they are doing is reinforcing the idea that we don't matter, that our lives don't matter, that our loved ones, that we don't have loved ones. And this is, it goes to what Amy was saying about the blurring between victims and workers, and that it is all contributing to the stigma that sex workers aren't real people, that we aren't human, no human involved, all of that sort of bullshit. And so when people are so insistent on talking about saving us and worrying about women, and of course sex workers are not all women, when they're talking about all of this stuff around the empowerment, actually what they're doing is benefiting the people who want to hurt us. And that does include governments and lawmakers and police officers, and it also includes violent individuals who just want to hurt us, because you are speaking right into what they want to think about us. Yeah. And it literally leads to our death.
Yeah. I think almost in kind of a similar vein, although it's not technically supposed to be one of the topics for today, it sort of is quite parallel with the porn addiction conversation, who benefits from framing things that way. It is quite often perpetrators of violent crimes who get to go, it wasn't me, it was the porn that made me do it. It wasn't me, I'm not a bad guy. I was having a weird thing going on with porn, and I'm over that now, so like I'm safe now, you know, I'm cool. And it's like, I'm not convinced by that. I have a feeling you might have done it regardless of porn. I'm not sure, you know. I don't know if we can blame it on that. I don't know if that's you taking accountability for what you did, you know. And I think there's a lot of conversations around sex work that end up being used as a way to pull accountability away from men and reflect it back onto women, especially undesirable women, you know, and say, well, it wasn't his fault, he's a good guy, it's your fault, you seduced him, you corrupted him, you rotted his mind with porn, you know, all of these sorts of ideas that are like, as a woman who's not pure, you've somehow damaged him by having contact with him, and now he's going to go and spread that damage into future relationships, but it's not his fault, it's your fault because you're the one that poisoned him to be that way. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a lot of ways that sex work is sort of framed in that way that takes a lot of accountability away from harmful men.
It's a very similar conversation that people have around video games and gun violence. And right now what's happening in Australia as well, and also additionally in Queensland, is youth violence, and how our in Queensland we have adult crime, adult time laws. And so rather than looking into why our youth are currently out on the street being violent and doing crimes that we don't usually see, although we have, what's behind that, we're just like, oh, well, no, we're just going to blame social media. We're going to trial these children as adults because it's an adult crime, even though the United Nations were like, hey, you're breaking human rights, you know, kind of things. And we were like, it's fine. And then again, similarly, like in Australia, we've just banned under 16s from accessing social media because apparently that's what's hurting them, and definitely not all of the other things in society that we have built around them and have raised them in instead. We're just going to look at the thing on the internet that we assume is wrong, rather than giving parents the education that they need to allow them to supervise their children online properly, or giving children the literacy to use the internet correctly, or God forbid using the parental controls that every app has. Like, all of that is there, but they would rather do a blanket rule. And again, I do truly think, and it's a hard topic to discuss in Australia at the moment, whether or not the social media ban on children is correct or not, because people have very strong views around it. But I truly, in my soul, believe that this is just the beginning of having more undesirable people removed from the internet. You start with under 16s, and then the next it'll be whatever group you decide is undesirable to be on the internet. Yeah. And very soon I will believe in Australia that we will see a decline in minority voices being allowed to speak on the internet and exist, and then moving even further from there until it is just the white religious man currently left talking on Instagram and no one else, and that's the only person you're allowed to listen to on the internet, and people don't see the slippery slope. And yeah, people will use all of these arguments. But yeah, people will use the video game argument, the social media argument, and the porn argument, all in the same vein, really all for the same end goal as well.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just social media. That's just the most publicised version of these bills that have gone through, and it has already been applied to search engines. It will be applied to apps, all these other things. We've seen similar stuff go through the UK, and we know for a fact the fucked results that has had, and the voices that it has silenced, and the access to support that it has taken away from marginalised communities. And I know it's being discussed in the US as well. I don't know if that's a federal thing or a state-based thing, but it's happening everywhere.
Yeah. It's horrifying, to be honest. I mean, a lot of what's happened in the UK, like Jenna's just mentioned, is a lot of like support forums and things people have completely lost access to. I have a friend who has like a Stay Sober app, which he can't use anymore because not only have they added like an age verification thing, but because it's a really small company, they've had to add a paywall to use the age verification because they can't afford to run it themselves. So you have to pay to age verify, and obviously that's something a lot of people don't want to do or can't afford to do. And so it's creating all of these barriers to communities that a lot of people do find incredibly helpful. And it's not only children that can no longer access them, it's all of us. You know, I can't see my own tweets anymore because they're considered adult material, and I refuse to age verify on that dog shit app owned by that piece of shit paedophile. But that's for another day. But I think one of the things that really hits me about the way that like video games and social media and porn are talked about as the way that they sort of like scar children for life, and I'm not suggesting that these things are age appropriate for children by any means, they're not, but I'm in my sort of like period piece era, like TV wise. I'm watching loads of old history shows, and it just keeps striking me that like 400 years ago, kids would be like walking around the town centre and there'd be like people getting beheaded in the middle of the town. Do you know what I mean? And that was no big deal. They didn't have people like running around becoming depraved serial killers then, and there's literally people like dying 200 feet away from you. And it's like, I just think we've gotten so like sensitive to some of these things. And I'm not saying that would be appropriate for a child in the 1800s, nor am I saying that a child should be watching porn today, but I think the idea that we treat these things as if they're like so corrupting that you're like irreversibly damaged from it, I think is just like mass hysteria, honestly. Like, it's quite insane to me. Like, when you put it in perspective of like the sort of gory things that people have lived through and not turned into complete monsters over, you think, well, clearly none of this is going to have an impact then.
I think a really common piece of legislation that pops up in places where sex work is legalised, quote unquote legalised, is restrictions on advertising. And I've often, when I'm speaking to civilians about this sort of thing, they'll say something like, oh, well, what do you want? To be able to put like an ad on a billboard, as though that's the most kind of preposterous suggestion. And I'm like, well, the alcohol companies can do that. So what is it? I mean, I'm not saying I'd be naked up there, but I might be wearing something a bit sexy. And what is it inherently about me being a woman and me selling that is so much worse? That is exactly what you're saying, Grace. That is going to fundamentally break a child in a way that looking at an ad selling them alcohol isn't.
Or a lingerie shop. You can see the exact same type of photography outside a lingerie shop, and that's not expected to break children's brains, but suddenly in the context where there's a little OnlyFans logo next to it, suddenly it's evil. Do you know what I mean? It's the same picture. It's literally
It's
the
funny
same.
to look in the US, like, I'm aging myself. I'm in the 2000s, you would have seen people half naked for, like, fucking Carl's Jr. or / Hardee's, the burger place. They were just, like, areola covered, that's it. That's what it was. And I was just like, which, weird sexual awakening for me, but yeah, it was just like, it was just there. Like, there were, like, billboards, there were commercials, like, there were commercials that had to be banned that got played the first few times, and they got banned for the language, not for, like, the boobs. So that's really crazy that, like, but then again, in the US, I have seen people have OnlyFans billboards, so.
Yeah, someone got one here once, and it, like, made the newspaper and everything. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had the same. There's like one everywhere that makes the paper. I think to this thing
Sorry, Jenna. I was going to say there's a billboard literally in Brisbane 24/7 about the Honeybee Strip Club. So, like, that one's allowed to exist because it's, I guess, pole dancing and not full service.
Yes.
And that one's been there, like, permanently. So it's like, well, it's the same thing. She's just in
That's the hierarchy, though, isn't it?
It looks incredible. It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah.
I think for me, I am going a little bit off topic, but I find this was such a fantastic example of it. I don't know if anyone else watched the TV show Hannibal, but there was one scene that had to be re-edited before it would pass by the censors, and it was, I think it was it one person or two people? It was a scene of a horrifically violent crime, where there were two people who were ostensibly naked but covered in blood. And you would think, yeah, it's a really horrifying scene. But the reason it had to be re-edited was that there was, like, a hint of crack or nipple or something.
Yeah.
And so they had to add more blood and guts to cover that up. And that was how they got it passed. And I thought, well, that fucking says everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
God forbid we see the top of someone's butt crack or we see a bit of areola. Just slap some
put some
on
organs
there.
on it, yeah.
That's okay. Put some organs on there and it's all fine and dandy.
But yeah, and I also think that's really interesting. A lot of the spaces that I'm in on TikTok are, like, this sort of, like, fandom talk, which I'm, like, not in that world at all. I have no idea what they're going on about half the time, but they constantly are talking about the way, like, dark media is sort of discussed. And so there's, like, types of dark media that are, like, sexual dark media, things like incest and, like, all of these, like, more taboo kinks and things like that. And then there's dark media like murder, cannibalism, you know, all of these more violence-based things that when people are like, no, dark media shouldn't be allowed, they're only usually ever talking about these, like, sexual types of dark media and these sexual themes. They're actually completely fine with the idea of, like, depicting cannibalism and all of these things, but, like, oh, stepsis is where we draw the line. Do you know what I mean? It's like all of these sort of arbitrary lines that we've drawn of, like, this is fine, ethically, I'm okay with this, even though I know it's not okay, but this is too far for me to enjoy in a fantasy scenario, even though, again, I know it's not okay in real life, but I'm okay with enjoying watching a thing about a cannibal. Do you know what I mean? And so it's this sort of cognitive dissonance where the things that I'm personally comfortable with, everyone else is allowed to be comfortable with, but the things that I'm uncomfortable with shouldn't be allowed to be depicted anywhere, you know? And I think that's a very interesting.
Well, it really makes you question where that's coming from, because I wonder whether in many cases it's because something like cannibalism or whatever is so far removed from that they think that's fantasy, that's not a thing that happens, even though we know it does, but of course not very much. But then some of the other things maybe feel closer to them.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thought process to go down. Why is it that actually maybe feels like something that could happen in your life? That's interesting.
And it's almost this thing, and I think a lot of people have discussed it in these terms of, like, moral OCD, of, like, you worrying that if you obsess over a thought too much, like, you start worrying that you're going to do it almost. And I sort of think maybe, like you say, the idea of like becoming a cannibal because you watched a cannibal on TV is so extreme that no one would ever think you'd do it. But that maybe in the back of some people's minds, they're like worried that if they watch a stepbro thing, they're going to fall in love with their actual stepbrother. And it's like, okay, well, I wasn't thinking that, but okay, you know.
All we need is that slight hint.
You shouldn't be worried that you're going to go out and do that in real life, because I wasn't worried when I watched it. At no point did it cross my mind that maybe I'll try that at home. Do you know what I mean? Like, no.
But that's that word, accountability.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it, is there's like this lack of personal accountability that is being pushed onto holding other people accountable. It's not like I'm going to hold myself accountable to not be in this space that makes me uncomfortable, but rather I'm going to hold everyone else accountable for making this space comfortable for me. You know, I'm going to intrude on this space that I was never comfortable in to begin with and wasn't really built for my interests, and I'm going to make them tailor it to me because I want to, you know. I think that's really interesting as well, this sort of like right to comfort almost.
I think that kind of ties into some of the thoughts and feelings I have around to go back to the social media ban for children. I feel as though a lot of my power as a parent is taken away from me when that is put in place, because I would like to parent how I wish to parent, and I wish to enact my own boundaries and discuss things with the child of my life and educate them in the way that I do. But because, again, in a capitalist society, I am forced to work rather than be at home with my child, and I am forced to dedicate an exorbitant amount of time to that, and then the government puts in place expensive options for things like childcare and essentially whittles down my ability to be present in my child's life, all the way to the point where now the government has to make parenting decisions for me. It just feels insane. Like, it feels as though now the power I have has been taken away from me based on the societal things around us. And no one ever wants to talk about the fact of that we can just, again, like in Australia, we have a lot of these systems in place to help parents and to give them a basic form of income, but it also hasn't increased in a very long period of time, and it is not something you can live off of anymore. And so they put all of these barriers in place to remove your ability to actually be a present parent. And then they put all of these societal difficulties in place that make it, they remove your ability to actually make all of those decisions on your own, or they remove the ability for you to be educated enough to make those decisions on your own. And then it places that education in someone else's hands, and I just have to trust that the education that is in someone else's hands is going to work and is going to be correct. And then on top of that, then when they take away my ability to now enforce whether or not my child can receive social media, at the time that I think is appropriate, it's actually it puts me in a box. It's almost as if it's WALL-E in the future, in the movie WALL-E, where all the parents, all the people in general are just in their own little bubble, and then you finally see all the kids and they're just like not with their parents, they're over there being educated by someone totally different. Who is that person educating my child? I don't know. What's the curriculum? I don't know. I'm not privy to that either. They don't tell me what the curriculum is. I mean, they do to an extent, but like, I'm not the one in control of the curriculum. The government could just any day just be like, oh, we're going to teach your kids this now, and you're at work, so you don't actually really get to tell us no. And it's illegal to leave your kid at home, obviously, because you don't want to leave your kid at home alone. It has to be looked after by someone. But the person looking after your kid, we're going to tell them to teach them. And it's these layers and layers and layers and layers of things on top that, again, are reinforcing these societal structures in the future. Like, ugh, it gives me the heebie-jeebies a lot of the time, to be honest.
It sounds like, in a way, like, because what you're describing, because, again, U.S., we've got them passing laws to put, like, the 10 Commandments in schools and having Bibles in schools, but specifically only certain Christianity. Like, so it's just, like, funny because it's, like, are you empowered as a sex worker? Because we're also going to take away your empowerment as a parent. Like, damn, it's like, fuck. It's like a graph. I'm trying to think of a graph. It's like you're, in some aspects, like, you have it in abundance, and then on the opposite side, it's like completely taken away. Because it doesn't make any sense to say that, like, I need to be empowered doing this job. I need to have whatever magical feelings you think I need to have, and I need to be able to make all the decisions, and everything has to always be my way, and I don't have to, like, you know, enter a survival mindset where I would see people for customers that I didn't want to or whatever. Like, I have to never be in that situation, but you also, like, are just stripping some of my most basic rights away, which, like, I think that parents should be able to dictate what ways they're introduced, because again, America, what ways they're introduced to religion, which ways, what they're being taught, to an extent, like, damn, I always have, like, caveats for everything, but, like, you should be taught facts as they are facts, not, like, if I wanted my child to learn, like, creationism, then I'm going to send them to a school that teaches that. But I don't want that to be infiltrated into, like, the public school system. Like, I want these things, and I don't want the government telling me that I can't do these things with my child that I deem appropriate as a parent. And I just think it's like, okay, you want me to prove I have all these rights and empowerment as a sex worker, but you don't want to give it to me for the most basic thing, which, again, in America, they're trying to force, like, women to have kids. You're not even going to let me fucking raise my kids the way I want to. What the, like, I know I keep saying this, but, like, are you fucking cool? Like, you don't sound cool, bro. You don't sound okay. You're not making a lot of sense. You're not making any sense, really.
It's because they don't want you to raise your children. They wish to steal the child and then raise it itself. In the way that they wish to deem that all the people, you know, that around them are little carbon copies of each other. You know, that's always their grand plan. Have as many kids as you can, and then give them to me, please.
So I can turn them into good little factory workers.
Exactly. I think we can't have this conversation as well without acknowledging that the reality for a lot of sex workers, the reality that is faced, is the possibility of having their children removed from their care because of the work they do. And of course that risk is only increased the more kind of intersecting marginalities that they kind of hold or occupy. And that will never, ever, ever make sense to me, because as I'm not a parent myself, but I've always thought for somebody who is a parent to go, do you know what, there's this opportunity to work in a way that's a higher rate of income for fewer hours of work, potentially, which is quite flexible, which I could do during school hours, and I could take the school holidays off, etc., etc. And so then I'm actually so able to be there for my kid in a way that a lot of people who are having to work full-time aren't able to be. And then the fact that can then be used against them to show that they aren't a fit carer is absolutely mind-boggling to me.
Is like that non-sex workers want us to have, like, where it needs to be, like, uplifting and shit. What could be more than that?
That's it. Let's go back to the start. We've come full circle. That's the definition of empowerment right there. Yeah. And, like, let's be real, that, like, sex work has always been a way, been a strategy, been a tool for women and non-binary individuals to leave abusive situations, to find some sense of economic empowerment, and to change their lives. I mean, the amount of people, the amount of sex workers, and this isn't going to be the case for everyone, right? But the amount of sex workers who have said to me, sex work saved my life. Yeah, I cannot count it. I think so many of us identify with that.
So our last question to sort of finish off is, what can we talk about that actually empowers sex workers? What are the conversations that we should be having, and what can people that care about sex workers being empowered, what can they do to realize that? What can they do to empower sex workers around the world?
I mean, it's the obvious thing that we scream and ask for 24/7, but it is treating the labour as the labour that it is, and allowing us to join in on the movements towards labour's rights that encompass us all, and just including us in the bubble that is all. We do not need our own bubble, although of course we have our own culture, just like every other workplace and niche area of society. But like one of the things that I really appreciate in my civilian job that I still have is that I get to be totally out and open with my boss and my entire workplace about sex work, and see that workplace embrace the skills that I have as a sex worker and use them to their advantage is the reality of what the rest of society can do. And it's encouraging them, and again we've been encouraging them for decades now to include us and our unique skill set in the discussions around labour and labour's rights, so that we all at the end of the day can feel empowered under capitalism to perform our roles in society and to engage in the labour in exchange for money in order to live and breathe and have housing and food on the table. And we've been asking that for ages, and we will continue to ask for it. And I'm not sure what the answer is in getting them to finally see it, but I have seen in my own life that it can be done on a micro scale. And maybe, just maybe, the more micro scales that it happens on, eventually the bubble will get bigger and bigger until we're included. Because right now I can see that it works in that small format, and it just, as more people come into the workplace and are introduced to me and they see that everyone around me in this bubble goes, oh yeah, no, and she's a sex worker, and this is the way we use her skills, and it is just talked about as if it's a totally normal civilian thing and that it's not othered, that they have to sit there and they process it for a minute and they go, oh well, if I want to exist in this bubble I have to obviously accept her as well, and then it's fine. And no one died, that the world didn't explode. No one was tortured or harmed. And then we just simply get on with our day, and we exchange skills and we exchange services, and we grow more and learn more all together. But you're not going to grow or learn more unless we are included. And then you can't benefit from the skills that we can provide unless we are included. And they always attempt to benefit from our skills and from our knowledge without including us. That's a lot of what the, trying to sell products to us and trying to exploit us in certain ways is to gain our skills without showing that the skills came from us. But God, at the end of the day, just let us exist and just include us in the battles, because we might have a strategy you haven't thought of yet to help you also not be exploited in your own workplace, or to help you, or to, in my case specifically, to help those who are marginalised by disability in their day-to-day lives. The skill set that I bring can be very unique for certain types of disabilities, and there have been things that have been made better in the disability care sector that I work in because of just purely being listened to and included and having a seat at the table. And giving me a seat at the table doesn't cost anything, even though a lot of people think that it does. And just I hope that one day it is just that we are all afforded the seat at the table.
I think as well, when it comes to workers' rights, and like you were saying, there are things that I think regular workers, so to speak, could learn from sex workers, and obviously vice versa in terms of pushing for rights and things, because I think, as we've all talked about earlier in this episode, there are a lot of ways in which sex work is significantly more accessible, more flexible, all of these things, than a lot of traditional work is. And I think a lot of traditional workers would benefit from those access things, those extra flexibilities, like, being able to take time off when your child is sick, or being able to come in late one day because you're not feeling well. Like, all of these things are not insane prospects for a workplace, to be able to have a slightly more flexible schedule, to be able to take days off at slightly shorter notice, but they are deemed as so unrealistic for these workplaces because they're so profit motivated and so productivity motivated. And I think there's an equal amount that a lot of traditional workers could learn about the sort of rights that they should be entitled to, of not having to ask to take a toilet break, not having to beg for an extra 15 minutes off at lunch, like all of these things that we take for granted, really, of, you know, being able to go and have a nap whenever we want, or like go home early because we're not doing, like, we've run out of tasks to do, or, you know, whatever it be. That, like, I think there's a lot that could go both ways when it comes to being together in like a community space talking about that at the moment we don't really get the chance to discuss.
I'll throw the D word in there, which is full decriminalisation of sex work. And that's not the answer at all. It is very much a starting point. It's not our end goal, right? But it's a really valuable, it can be a valuable starting point. I'm sure there's others, but someone the other day was saying to me, how come sex workers in Australia are very, like, we call it the P word, and we can be quite kind of particular about our language, and I think we're quite strong on those points. Whereas I don't know if in regular discourse if they're referred to this way, but there's like the English Prostitutes Collective, for instance, and there are organisations in other parts of the world that use the P word in their name and stuff like that. And somebody was like, Australian workers just a bit precious, you know, basically. And they asked with good faith. And I said that I think it's about, because we have had so many wins in terms of legislation and we still have a very far way to go, you don't get to tell people what to call you when you are not considered human and not considered a labourer and part of the workforce, you know. So I think some of that stuff we've been able to have these great wins more socially because of the wins that we've had legislatively. It kind of goes back and forth. I mean, the two really, really work together. But I think in terms of if we want to empower sex workers, then decriminalisation and proper full decriminalisation, which means that everyone is decriminalised, not just citizens, not just white people, not just cis people, not just HIV negative people, for instance, then from that point, then we can start to talk as well about destigmatizing. We can talk about protections around stigma and discrimination. We can start to talk about nuanced labour rights. You know, I think examples in the industry that SWERFs and antis and radfems will jump on is where there are situations where workers are disempowered in settings where they have less control over their work. Like, we've talked about that a lot here today, right? Like, the control that a lot of us feel we have over our work. And where that gets taken away from you, like in any industry, is when there is somebody else who has power over your work. So then we need to talk about situations like brothels, like agencies, like massage parlors, like strip clubs. Then we can get into the nuance of that. Because right now, in a situation where people don't even see us as workers, and I've had people say to me, God, I'm sick of hearing sex workers work. And I'm like, well, you don't have to keep fucking hearing it because you're not believing it yet. Until we are able to truly see sex workers as workers, then we can't have these nuanced conversations. Because as soon as you say, you know, the owner of the brothel sort of gave me no option and I didn't feel like I had a choice in doing this, then it's, well, you've been trafficked, you know, and we just get lumped into that, and we can't actually just talk about exploitative working conditions or subpar working conditions, which again happen in every industry. And we should be able to have some recourse. We should have access to work health and safety, you know, guidelines and things like that. So yes, I'll say decrim as the very, very starting point, and then there is so much more to be done.
I feel like we simultaneously need decriminalization, education that will lead to destigmatization. Because one of the things that I've, like, I don't know if you've noticed when I speak, like, I go on tangents or I have like tangential thoughts because everything blooms out. Like, everything, all of my thoughts, I start as one thing, and then I have to go from that. Like, I have like this other minor point. And if people aren't educated, if people aren't genuinely curious to think about things, you'll never realize all these other little nuances and all these other little situations that can pop up. So, like, the idea of decriminalization, like, that kind of, like, helps, like, on the government level, but, like, to be educated and to have, like, to be thinking, that's how you would really enforce destigmatization. Because I can say that, like, okay, this job becomes normalized because of decrim, but you're thinking of it and how you relate to us being just workers, or this is just a job that people do, that has to come from you being genuinely curious and having your own thoughts on the matter. Like, your brain needs to be cooking, it needs to be rolling downhill further and further. Like, so, but the thing is, I don't know how to make people be curious. I guess the best way would be like people who are curious, people who do have those blooming thoughts that go, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Like, I guess there should be more of that. Like, people in my frame of mind speak more, put more out there to have conversations about it. Because while I'm very pessimistic and I don't think that people really change too much or learn too much, it probably can't hurt. It probably can't hurt to try to have these ideas and put them out there and have someone hear how my brain works specifically, or like how someone's brain could work similarly, and go from there. Because I can never just think about my position. Like, I have to think, well, what about this other person that has just as much marginalization as me, but I don't experience it at all? I have to sit there and think about what it's like to be in that person's shoes. And I think people who have these different points of view need to speak on it so more people can latch on if they're capable of latching on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for curiosity, and I think one of the biggest hurdles to that is people not looking past their own initial assumptions. So, like, they'll have an assumption that this is shameful or dangerous or violent or whatever it be, and they won't want to explore past that and, you know, question that belief. They'll just go, yeah, that explains it, you know, and not, like you say, not explore any of the nuance of maybe why it's dangerous sometimes, or maybe why it's exploitative sometimes. You know, maybe those things have reasonable explanations that could be fixed quite easily, you know, or maybe not easily, but, you know, a lot more easily if you tried to talk about it, at least.
Yeah.
All right, well then, we'll leave it there, and hopefully with all the technical issues we've had, fingers crossed, we'll have a complete recording of something at the end of it. I'll let you guys know how that goes, but thank you all so much for joining, and hopefully speak to you all soon. Thank you.
Right, bye.
Thank you. Thanks
Bye.
for all of the organisational work that goes into this.
Well, it's not gone too well this time, but we're still practicing. We'll get there soon.
We'll get there. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Well,
Bye.
see you all.